Hi, my name is Prerak Sharma. I am the first year student of MBA Data Science and AI at IIT Mandi. I've started this series of speaking something, be it communication, reading, or books, anything, to improve my communication skills. I'll do this for 2 years, and today I believe it's the sixth day. So, without wasting much time, I'm currently reading Steve Jobs. Let's begin for 20 minutes. Let me begin the timer so that I have some clue of the time. So, let's begin. Tetsu came from a troubled family. Jobs shared with her his Ritzel came from a troubled family, and Job shared with her his own pain about being put up for adoption. We were both wounded from our childhood, Ritzel recalled. He said to me that we were misfits, which is why we belonged together. They were physically passionate and prone to public displays of affection. Their makeout sessions in the next lobby are well remembered by employees, so too were their fights, which occurred at movie theaters and in front of visitors to Woodside. Yet he constantly praised her purity and naturalness. As the well-grounded Joanna Hoffman pointed out when discussing Job's infatuation with the otherworldly racist, Steve had a tendency to look at vulnerabilities and neuroses and turn them into special attributes. When he was being eased out at Apple in 1985, Retzi traveled with him in Europe, where he was salving his wounds. Standing on a bridge over the Seine one evening, they bandied about the idea, more romantic than serious, of just saying staying in France, maybe settling down perhaps indefinitely. Redse was eager, but Jobs didn't want to. He was burnt, but still ambitious. I am a reflection of what I do. She recalled this Paris moment on a poignant email she sent to him 25 years later, after they had gone their separate ways, but restrained their spiritual connection. We were on a bridge in Paris in the summer of 1985. It was overcast. We leaned against the smooth stone rail and stared at the green water rolling on below. Your world had cleaved and then it paused, waiting to rearrange itself around whatever you chose next. I wanted to run away from what had come before. I tried to convince you to begin a new life with me in Paris, to shed our former selves and yet let something else course through us. I wanted us to crawl through that black chasm of a broken wound world and emerge anonymous and new in simple lives where I could cook you simple dinners and we could be together every day, like children playing a sweet game with no purpose save the game itself. I like to think you considered it before you laughed and said, what could I do? I made myself unemployable. I like to think that in the moment's hesitation before our bold futures reclaimed us, we lived that simple life together all the way into our peaceful old ages with a brood of grandchildren around us on a farm in the south of France, quietly going about our days warm and complete like loaves of fresh bread, a small world filled with the aroma of patience and familiarity. The relationship lurched up and down for 5 years. Redse hated living in his sparsely furnished woodside house. Jobs had hired a hip young couple who had once worked at Chez Panais as housekeepers and vegetarian cooks, and they made her feel like an interloper. She would occasionally move out to an apartment of her own in Palo Alto, especially after one of her torrential arguments with Jobs. Neglect is a form of abuse. She once scrawled on the wall of the halfway to the bedroom. She was entranced by him, but she was also baffled by how uncaring he could be. She would later recall how incredibly painful it was to be in love with someone so self-centered. Caringly deep, Caring deeply about someone who seemed incapable of caring was a particular kind of hell that she won't wish on anyone, she said. They were different in so many ways. On the spectrum of cruel to kind, they are close to the opposite poles. Hertzfeld later said, Retz's kindness was manifest in ways large and small. She always gave money to street people. She volunteered to help those who were afflicted with mental illness. And she took care to make Lisa and even Christian feel comfortable with her more than anyone. She helped persuade Jobs to spend more time with Lisa, but she lacked Jobs' ambition and drive. The ethereal quality that made her seem so spiritual to Jobs also made it hard for them to stay on the same wavelength. Their relationship was incredibly tempestuous, said Hertzfeld. Because of both of their characters, they would have lots of fights. They also had a basic philosophical difference about whether aesthetic tastes were fundamentally individual, as Redsey believed, or universal and could be taught as Jobs believed. She accused him of being too influenced by the Bauhaus movement. Steve believed it was our job to teach people aesthetics, to teach people what they should like. She recalled, I don't share that perspective. I believe when we listen deeply, both within ourselves and to each other, we are able to allow what's innate and true to emerge. When they were together for a long stretch, things did not work out well. But when they were apart, Jobs would pine for her. Finally, in the summer of 1989, he asked her to marry him. She couldn't do it. I would drive her it would drive her crazy. She told friends. She had grown up in a volatile household, and her relationship with Jobs bore too many similarities to that environment. They were opposites who attracted, she said, but the combination was too combustible. I could not have been a good wife to Steve Jobs, she later explained. I would have sucked at it on many levels. In our personal interactions, I couldn't abide his unkindness. I didn't want to hurt him, yet I didn't want to stand by and watch him hurt other people either. It was painful and exhausting. After they broke up, Redse found Open Mind, a mental health resource network in California. She happened to read in a psychiatric manual about narcissistic personality disorder and decided that Jobs perfectly met the criteria. It fit so well and explained so much of what he had struggled with that I realized expecting him to be nicer or less self centered was like expecting a blind man to see, she said. It also explains some of the choices. Psychiatric manual about narcissistic personality disorder and decided that Jobs perfectly met the criteria. It fit so well and explained so much of what he had struggled with that I realized expecting him to be nicer or less self centered was like expecting a blind man to see. She said it also explained me some of the choices he'd made about his capacity, about his daughter Lisa at that time. I think the issue is empathy. The capacity for empathy is lacking. Redsey later married, had two children, and then divorced. Every now and then, Jobs would openly pine for her even after he was happily married, and when he began his battle with cancer, she got in touch again to give her support. She became very emotional whenever she recalled their relationship, though our values clashed and made it impossible for us to have the relationships we once hoped for. She told me the care and love I felt for him decades ago was continued. Similarly, Job suddenly started to cry one afternoon as he sat in his living room, reminiscing about her. She was one of the purest people I've ever known. He said, tears rolling down his cheeks. There was something spiritual about her and spiritual about the connection we had. He said he always regretted that they could not make it work, and he knew that she had such regrets as well, but it was not meant to be. On that, they both agreed. Family man at home with the Jobs clan. Laurent Powell, by this point, based on his dating history, a matchmaker could have put together a composite sketch of the woman who would be right for Jobs. Smart, yet unpretentious. Tough enough to stand up to him, yet zen-like enough to rise above turmoil. Well-educated man and independent, yet ready to make accommodations for him and family. Down to earth, but with a touch of ethereal. Savvy enough to know how to manage him, but secure enough to not always need to. And it won't hurt to be a beautiful, lanky blonde with an easygoing sense of humor who liked vegetarian food. In October 1989, after he split with Tina Day, let's say, just such a woman walked into his life. More specifically, just such a woman walked into his classroom. Jobs had agreed to give one of the view from top lectures at the Stanford Business School one Thursday evening. Lawrence Powell was a new graduate student at the business school, and a guy in her class talked her into going to the lecture. They arrived late, and all the seats were taken, so they sat in the aisle. When an usher told them they had to move, Powell took her friend down to the front row and commanded two of the reserved seats there. Commandeered. Jaws was led to the one next to her when he arrived. I looked to my right and there was a beautiful girl there. So we started chatting, and while I was waiting to be introduced, Jobs recalled, they bantered a bit. Lawrence joked that she was sitting there because she had won a raffle and the prize was that he got to take her to dinner. He was so adorable, she later said. After the speech, Jobs hung around on the edge of stage chatting with students. He watched Powell leave, then come back and stand at the edge of the crowd, then leave again. He bolted out after her, rushing past the dean, who was trying to grab him for a conversation. After catching up with her in the parking lot, he said, "Excuse me, wasn't this something about a raffle you won that I'm supposed to take you to dinner?" She laughed. "How about Saturday?" he asked. She agreed and wrote down her number. Jobs headed to his car to drive up to the Thomas Fouchetry winery in the Santa Cruz Mountains above Woodside, where the next education sales group was holding a dinner. But he suddenly stopped and turned around. I thought, wow, I'd rather have dinner with her than the education group. So I ran back to her car and said, "How about dinner tonight?" She said yes. It was a beautiful fall evening, and they walked into Palo Alto to a funky vegetarian restaurant, St. Michael's Alley, and ended up staying there for 4 hours. We've been together ever since. Evie Tivanian was sitting at the winery restaurant waiting with the rest of the next education group. Steve was sometimes unreliable, but when I talked to him, I realized that something special had come up. I thought, wow, holding an about where the next education sales group was holding a dinner. But he supposed suddenly stopped and turned around. I thought, wow, I'd rather have dinner with her than the education group. So I ran back to her car and said, how about dinner tonight? She said yes. It was a beautiful fall evening, and they walked into Palo Altos to a funky vegetarian restaurant, St. Michael's Alley, and ended up staying there for 4 hours. We've been together ever since, he said. A.B. Tavanian was sitting at the winery restaurant waiting with the rest of the next education group. Steve was sometimes unreliable, but when I talked to him, I realized that something special had come up. He said as soon as Powell got home after midnight, she called her close friend Catherine Smith, who was at Berkeley, and left a message on a machine. You will not believe what just happened to me, it said. You will not believe who I met. Smith called back to the next morning and heard the tale. We had known about Steve, and he was a person of interest to her because we were business students, she recalled. Andy Hostel and a few others later speculated that Powell had been scheming to meet jobs. Lawrence is nice, but she can be calculating, and I think she targeted him from the beginning, Hatzfeld said. Her college roommate told me that Lawrence had magazine covers of Steve and vowed she was going to meet him. If it's true that Steve was manipulated, there is fair amount of irony there. But Powell later insisted that this wasn't the case. She went only because a friend wanted to go, and she was slightly confused as to who they were going to see. I knew that Steve Jobs was the speaker, but the face I thought was of the Bill Gates, she recalled. I had them mixed up. This was 1989, he was working at Next, and he was not that big of a deal to me. I wasn't that interested, but my friend was, so we went. There were only two women in my life that I was truly in love with, Tina and Lawrence. Tina Retzi, right? Jobs later said, I thought I was in love with Joan Baez, but I really just liked her a lot. It was just Tina and then Lawrence. Lawrence Powell had been born in New Jersey in 1963 and learned to be self-sufficient at an early age. Her father was a Marine Corps pilot who died a hero in crash in Santa Ana, California. He had been leading a crippled plane in for a landing, and when it hit his plane, he kept flying to avoid a residential area rather than ejecting in time to save his life. Her mother's second marriage turned out to be a horrible situation, but she felt she couldn't leave because she had no means to support her large family. For 10 years, Lawrence and the three brothers had to suffer in a tense household, keeping a good demeanor while compartmentalizing problems. She did well. The lessons I learned was clear that I always wanted to be self-sufficient, she said. I took pride in that. My relationship with money is that it's a tool to be self-sufficient, but it's not something that is a part of who I am. Lawrence Powell, it turned out to be a horrible situation, but she felt she couldn't leave because she had no means to support her large family. For 10 years, Lawrence and her three brothers had to suffer in a tense household, keeping a good demeanor while compartmentalizing problems. She did well. The lesson I learned was clear that I always wanted to be self-sufficient. She said, I took pride in that. My relationship with money is that it's a tool to be self-sufficient, but it's not something that is a part of who I am. After graduating from the University of Pennsylvania, she worked at Goldman Sachs as a fixed income trading strategist, dealing with enormous sums of money that she traded for the house account. John Corzine, her boss, tried to get her away to stay at Goldman, but insisted she decided the work was unedifying. You could be really successful, she said, but you are just contributing to capital formation. So, after 3 years, she quit and went to Florence, Italy, living there for 8 months before enrolling in Stanford Business School. After the Thursday night dinner, she invited Jobs over to her Palo Alto apartment on Saturday. Cat Smith drove down from Berkeley and pretended to be her roommate so she could meet him as well. The relationship became very passionate. They would kiss and make out, Smith said. He was in rapture with her. He would call me on the phone and ask, what do you think? Does she like me? I am in this bizarre position of having this iconic person call me. That New Year's Eve of 1989, the three went to Chez Fanny's, the famed Alice Waters restaurant in Berkeley, along with Lisa, then 11. Something happened at the dinner that caused Jobs and Powell to start arguing. They left separately, and Powell ended up spending the night at Cat Smith's apartment. At 9 the next morning, there was a knock at the door, and Smith opened it to find Jobs standing in the drizzle holding some wild fuzzy epic. May I come in and see Lawrence? He said. She was still asleep, and he walked into the bedroom. A couple of hours went by. Well, Smith waited in the living room, unable to go in and get her clothes. Finally, she put a coat on over her night gown and went to Pete's Coffee to pick up some food. Jobs did not emerge until afternoon. Cat, can you come here for a minute? They all gathered in the bedroom. As you know, Lawrence's father passed away and Lawrence's mother isn't here. And since you are her best friend, I'm going to ask you the question. He said, I like to marry Lawrence. Will you give your blessing? Smith clambered onto the bed and thought about it. Is this okay with you? She asked Powell. When she nodded yes, Smith announced, well, there's your answer. It was not, however, a definitive answer. Jobs had a way of focusing on something with insane intensity for a while and then abruptly turning away his grace. At work, he would focus on what he wanted to do when he wanted to, and on the other matters, he would be unresponsive, no matter how hard people tried to get him to engage. In his personal life, he was the same way. At times, he and Powell would indulge in public display of affection that was so intense they embarrassed everyone in their presence, including Cat Smith and Powell's mother. In the morning at his woodside mansion, he would wake Powell up by blasting at the fine young cannibal. She drives me crazy. On his state deck, yet at other times he would ignore her. Steve would fluctuate between intense focus, where she was the center of the universe, to being coldly distant and focused on work, said Smith. He had the power to focus like a laser beam, and when it came across you, you basked in the light, very of his attention. When it moved to another point of focus, it was very, very dark for you. It was very confusing to Lawrence. Once she had accepted his marriage proposal on the 1st of 1990, he didn't mention it again for several months. Finally, Smith confronted him while they were sitting on the edge of sandbox in Palo Alto. What was going on? Jobs replied that he needed to feel sure that Powell could handle the life he lived and the type of person he was. In September, she became fed up with waiting and moved out. The following month, he gave her a diamond engagement ring and she moved back in. In December, Jobs took Powell to his favorite vacation stop, Kona Village in Hawaii. He had started going there 9 years earlier when stressed out at Apple. He had asked his assistant to pick out a place for him to escape. At first glance, he didn't like the cluster of thatched roof bungalow nestled on a beach on that big island of Hawaii. It was a family resort with communal eating, but within hours he had begun to view it as a paradise. There was simplicity and spare beauty that moved him, and he returned whenever he could. He especially enjoyed being there that December with Powell. Their love had matured. The night before Christmas, he again declared, even more formally, that he wanted to marry her. Soon after, factor would drive that decision while in Hawaii, Powell got pregnant. We know exactly where it happened. Jobs later said it with a laugh. The wedding, March 18, 1991, Paul's pregnancy did not completely settle the issue. Jobs again began balking at the idea of marriage, even though he had dramatically proposed to her both at the very beginning and the very end of 1990. Furious, she moved out of his house and back to her apartment. For a while, he sulked or ignored the situation, then he thought she might still be in love with Tina Resday. He sent her roses and tried to convince her to return to him, maybe even get married. He was not sure what he wanted, and he surprised a wide swath of friends, even acquaintances, by asking them what he should do. Who was prettier, he would ask, Tina or Lawrence? Who did they like better? Who should he marry? In a chapter about this in Mona Simpson's novel A Regular Guy, the Jobs character asked more than 100 people who they thought was more beautiful. But that was fiction. In reality, it was probably fewer than 100. He ended up making the right choice. As Redsey told friends, she never would have survived if she had gone back to Jobs, nor would their marriage. Even though he would pine about the spiritual nature of his connection to Redsey, he had a far more solid relationship with Powell. He liked her, he loved her, he respected her, and he was comfortable with her. He may not have seen her as mystical, but she was a sensible anchor for his life. He's the luckiest guy to have landed with Lawrence, who is smart and can engage him intellectually and can sustain his ups and downs and tempestuous personality, said Joanna Hoffman. Because she's not neurotic, Steve may feel that she's not as mystical as Tina or something, but that's silly. Andy Hertzfeld agreed. Lauren looks a lot like Tina, but she's totally different because she is together and armor plated. That's why the marriage works. Jobs understood this as well. Despite his emotional turbulence and occasional meanness, the marriage would turn out to be enduring, marked by loyalty and faithfulness, overcoming the ups and downs of jangling emotional complexities it encountered. A.V. Tevanian decided Jobs needed a bachelor's party. This was not as easy as it sounded. Jobs did not like to party and didn't have a gang of male buddies. He didn't even have a best man. So the party turned out to be just Tevanian and Richard Crandall, a computer science professor at Reed who had taken leave to work at Next. Tevanian hired a limo, and when they got to Jobs' house, Powell answered the door, dressed in a suit and wearing a fake mustache, saying that she wanted to come as one of the guys. It was just a joke. And soon the three bachelors, none of them drinkers, were rolling to San Francisco to see if they could pull off their own pale version of a bachelor party. Tivanian had been unable to get reservation at Green's, the vegetarian restaurant at Fort mentioned that Jobs likes, so he booked a very fancy restaurant at a hotel. I don't want to eat, a Jobs announced. As soon as the bread was placed on the table, he made them get up and walk out To the horror of Devanian, who was not yet used to Jobs' restaurant manners. He led them to Cafe Jacqueline in North Beach, the souffle place that he loved, which was indeed a better choice. Afterward, they took the limo across the Golden Gate Bridge to a great bar in Sausalito, where all three ordered shots of tequila but only sipped them. It was not great as bachelor parties go, but it was the best we could come up with. For someone like Steve, and nobody else volunteered to do it, he recalled Tivanian. Jobs was appreciative. He decided that he wanted Tivanian to marry his sister Mona Simpson, though nothing came of it. The thought was a sign of affection. Powell had fair warning of what she was getting into. As she was planning the wedding, the person who was going to do the calligraphy for invitations came by the house to show them some options. There was no furniture for her to sit on, so she sat on the floor and laid out the samples. Jobs looked for a few minutes, then got up and left the room. They waited for him to come back, but he didn't. After a while, Powell went to find him in his room, get rid of her. He said, I can't look at her stuff, he said. Thank you guys for watching. Do like this video, share if you want to, and comment anything that I should improve or any query that you have. You can also connect to me directly on LinkedIn. You will have my LinkedIn in the description below. So thank you so much. Bye. Just a second. Now, bye.